thank you for being here. It's nice seeing some of the people that I've been working with for a long time, and especially on issues around incarceration, racism. So it's always nice to see you. I just met Ronald, and also I just met Ty, and which was a great experience. I'm just so excited. I feel really lucky that I'm having the opportunity to not only meet them, but also to discuss some of the issues that we're all very concerned about. I also just finished the book yesterday, which was a rush job, but I got through it all, and it wasn't hard because the book is incredible. And so I also left, after I read the book, a feeling that I've known you all my life, because in the book, he really is able to express all of the feelings that he had, what was going on in his mind during this terrible time. I've worked with people who've been incarcerated for a long time, and we were just talking about that. And I also have a number of people who have written about their experiences being incarcerated. But for the first time, I really got a strong feeling, and I was able to almost be there with you, if you can understand that, because there were so many things happening. And I've been with a number of people who've been incarcerated for long periods of time. And I never quite understood where they got their strength from and how you would be able to do something and live in the environments that we provide for people when we incarcerate them, and what happens in your mind and your heart and your soul when you're put in that particular situation. It's always puzzled me. But the book was able to help me by bringing me along, and he's done a wonderful job of sharing how he felt, and I really appreciate that. So I think the book is a great gift, and if you haven't read it, I urge you to do that because I think you'll come away with the same feeling. Also in the book, he explains a lot and talks a lot about the issues that, as I see some of you here, that we've been struggling with and working with locally on racism, incarceration, mass incarceration, and a whole bunch of other issues. And he has something to say about so many things. There's so many things in that book that caused me to sort of re-examine what I've been doing in this work for all these years, and looking at some of the problems that we have here in Albany and Troy and Schenectady, and realize that across the country, we've done an incredibly poor job of dealing with crime and criminalizing people and putting them in places that no human being should be put in. Also understood from the book about the death penalty and being on death row, what that really means. See, we advocates deal a lot with these concepts of mass incarceration and statistics, but we don't often get a chance to really get under the skin, to feel to some extent, and we can never feel all the stuff that you went through, but to be able to feel to some extent what that is like and what the impact is on a human being and their families. And so this book helped me understand a lot of that. At the Center for Law and Justice and some of the other organizations that you represent, we've been, as I said, dealing with a lot of these issues, and hopefully we'll be able to talk later about some of them. We certainly at the Center for Law and Justice has at the top of our list of things that we would like to see happen is to get rid of prisons, make sure that no one ever gets executed in this country again, and not only mass incarceration, but the ethnic and racial job that people have found themselves in terms of being disproportionately incarcerated and sentenced to these horrible places. So we can talk a little bit about what's going on here in terms of doing that. I know a lot of you involved with a bail reform and a whole bunch of issues, speedy trial. All of those issues will probably, we will touch on tonight. And I am really, as again, very, very, very pleased to be here with Ronald and Ty. And I have the job of introducing them, and then once we're finished doing that, I will talk a little bit about how we're going to proceed in terms of getting them to respond to some questions, and then hopefully you will join in with us so that we can have a pretty good informal discussion. So how does that sound? I'm going to read a little bit from the introduction here so that you'll get a better sense of these two people. Ronald Kitchen was walking to buy cookies for his young son on a summer evening in 1988 when Chicago detectives picked him up for questioning. As the officer's car headed toward the precinct, the 22-year-old called out the window to his family. He said, "I'll be back in 45 minutes. It took him 21 years to make it home." And just think about what that does to him and his family. It's devastating. Kitchen was beaten and tortured by Chicago's notorious police commander, Jon Burge, and his cronies, until finally confessing to a gruesome quintuple homicide he did not commit. Convicted of murder and sentenced to die, he spent the next 2 decades in prison, including 12 years on death row. I don't know if we could ever imagine that. Before at last winning his release and exoneration. Ronald Kitchen's ordeal was not his alone. He was only one of scores of victims of Jon Burge and his notorious Midnight Crew, a group of rogue Chicago police detectives who spent decades terrorizing, brutalizing, and incarcerating men. More than 120 have come forward so far in Chicago's African American communities. During his years in jail, Kitchen co-founded the Death Row 10 from his maximum security cell block. Together, these men fought to expose the grave injustices that led to their wrongful convictions. The Death Row 10 appeared on 60 Minutes, Nightline, Oprah, and Geraldo Rivera. And with the help of lawyers and activists, were instrumental in turning the tide against the death penalty in the state of Illinois. Kitchen was finally exonerated in 2009 and won a high-profile lawsuit against the city of Chicago. My Midnight Years is the first book to be published about the Jon Burge scandal. Ty Jones, to my left, is a lecturer in history at Columbia University whose work examines radical social movements and political organizing. He is the author of 2 previous books, His writings have appeared in a variety of national publications, ranging from The New Yorker and The New York Times to The Nation and the occupied Wall Street Journal. So, so let's welcome them. Okay, I'm going to start with you, Ronald. Can you just tell us a little bit about what made you want to write this book? And you know, how are you feeling now since the book is finished and out?
Hello, everybody. I think this book is important because of the issues that's at hand. See, we believe that, well, some of us believe, or a lot of us believe, that this is only an issue that's in Chicago. No, we got the same problem in Philadelphia, California, New York, any major city. We have these very same issues. And like I tell people, this is bigger than Ronald Kitchen. It's bigger than the Death Row 10 when we started this in the 90s on Death Row. It's bigger than this. And I have always felt that it was going to take off and be bigger than we ever thought it was. When we started the Death Row 10, we started this in 1996. It was a bunch of guys, we was on death row, and we used to have these mock trials, and the guard used to let us have law classes in the lower rec on Tuesdays. Every Tuesday, he's going there for 2 hours. And in that, a lot of us came across that we were seeing the same tactics, the same police officers' names was coming up in a lot of our cases. So one of the co-founders, which is Stanley Howard, he said, we need a name, because it's a lot of us. And it was more than 10, but the Death Row 10 had a nice ring to it. Not the Death Row 15, not the Death Row 11, but the Death Row 10 had a real nice ring to it. So when we started that, then we said, we're going to need somebody outside to help us, because people wasn't listening. We had wrote Jesse Jackson, we had wrote Al Sharpton, we had wrote Minister Farrakhan. We was reaching out to a lot of so-called black leaders in our communities, but it was actually falling on deaf ears. I remember when we wrote the minister, and he said, you know, if we're not part of his organization, there's nothing he can do for us. I remember when we wrote Jesse Jackson, his response was, he don't have time for it. And when we got a letter from Al Sharpton told us to write Jesse Jackson. So, and that, you know, that's hard feeling when you're supposed to have these so-called leaders in our communities that's not fighting for us. Everybody was in for themselves. So Stanley Howard's mom, Jeanette, my mom, Frank Bound's mom, we talking about, I think these three women went to the campaign to end the death penalty with force. And when they went, it was a mission. This was a mission for them. And without their help, and then without the campaign activists, what we see, I don't think would have happened without them doing what they're doing or helping us from the outside. We needed a voice. They became our voice. We needed faces to our names. At first, it was just Stanley Howard, Ronald Kitchen, the monster, Marvin Reeves, the monster, Frank Bounds, the monster. We was monsters. And that's how they betrayed us. They betrayed us as monsters. So when the activists got involved, and our moms took off and went with them to fight. And we have to remember that they was being threatened by the police, city of Chicago police officers. They was getting bricks thrown through their window. They come out, they got stop signs going through their windshields. They on flats. Was spit at. When they was trying to talk, they was on the other bullhorns, calling them all type of absurd names, trying to deter them from doing what they felt and was right. So when I look back and I think about what we had to go through to get where we at today. It was a fight, and it still is a fight. People say, do you think it's changed? No, it haven't changed. Faces have, but the tactics is the same. It's just now we're seeing more police crimes on the street than we did in the police stations now. You know, like I was talking earlier about how I got pulled over, and it's serious when you know you haven't done it wrong. And no, my mistake. And I was talking about I had thought somebody stole my car just out here today, and was looking for my car at the mall. We had just misplaced it. We was at one side of the mall, but my car was on the other side of the mall, and I'm sitting here arguing that somebody done stole my car. So I wanted to report it, but I couldn't report it because I said if we find the car and the police see that we ride in my car, I don't want to get stopped and get killed for having my own car. So we had to wait. I'm out there freezing for an hour, probably 2 hours, trying to look for a car that belonged to me that I was scared to report to say I done lost my car because I was scared to get killed driving my own car. And that's what we see. You know, stop resisting. He going for my gun, stuff like that. I didn't want that to happen. So when I have groups like this, it touches me, and sometimes I try to veer away from a lot of questions because it's hard for me to get into it, especially like my mom. So when I wrote this book, I was more like trying to give my mother the praises that she need for the fault that she gave. So when people read this book, I want people to understand this book came not just from my heart, but from Ty and Logan's heart too, because they sat here and they had to deal with me. They had to deal with me asking them to take certain stuff out because certain stuff I felt that was too personal, and that whoever I was talking about, whoever it was aiming at, it was me and that person. So, yeah, that's it.
I know that you had to deal with a lot in Chicago before you were incarcerated. I keep forgetting about this mic. I know you had to deal with a lot in your family and your living situation before you were incarcerated. What was going on in Chicago that sort of caused your experience to play out? Was there something in Chicago going on at that particular time that we should know about?
What you mean?
You know, like with the police department or the city, the government? Was there something there that was not what you would have liked to see happen in a city?
I mean, as far as what's happening in Chicago, I mean, the police supposed to be there to serve and protect, you know. So, but when I don't know what was going on in the 80s other than drugs or whatever, but I don't know. I can't speak for the I can't speak for the police. I can't speak for the mayor. I can't speak for the state's attorney office. I can't speak of what was going on with them for them to do what they did.
Well, in terms of the police department, were there things like stop of African-American males on the street, searching or anything like that?
or like the stop and frisk.
Yeah, frisk,
So,
the
I mean,
kinds of things going
this was
on.
the '80s. You know, the police back in the '80s. I don't think they needed a reason to stop you. They just pull you over and drag you into the alley, and make you strip down, or make you strip your clothes, take your clothes off in the middle of the street. So it was to us it was the norm. This was the '80s. This was the norm. Being stopped by the police, being searched by the police, being harassed, and something continues to happen for so many years. It becomes part of the norm. It's like an everyday thing. You know, it was nothing new for me to step outside and get in my car. The police pull me over and search me, or talk to me, or talk crazy back to me. This was part of the norm back then.
Right. And the same thing is happening in New York City and Albany and Troy and this area here. The same kinds of things were going on.
I mean, yeah, they call it, they had made a thing to stop and frisk on black men, you know. They had just, back then, it didn't say stop and frisk. They just stopped you. You know, so now they just blatantly just let you know this is, if we see you, we're going to stop you. If you're a black man, we're going to get you. I mean, it's blatant now. Back, like I said, in the 80s, it was just, hey, pull him over. Now it's like, I don't care. You know, I don't care. The law said for us to stop and frisk, so this is what we're going to do, even though we know it's biased and it's racist, but it don't make a difference now.
Ty, could you tell us, I know you did certainly a lot of work and a lot of research on what was happening. What did you learn something from American history by doing this kind of research?
What a great question. Yeah, so I mean, I think I can say a few things that speak to what you were just asking about Chicago in the 1980s. You know, one thing that Logan and I were really amazed to learn about was about Ronald's family and about the history of your family going back a few generations, and it really felt like time and again your family was interacting with these really important historical milestones and events. So your mother and your grandmother moved up from Georgia to Chicago in the early 1960s, right at a time when so many African-American families were making that migration. Ronald's family was one of the first families in the Robert Taylor homes, which was a massive public housing development in Chicago. In fact, it was the largest public housing development in the world at the time. And then they were one of the first families to move out of that project into one of Chicago's all-white residential neighborhoods on the South Side, where they had this unbelievable battle against racism that really was fought out every day, fighting their way to school, fighting their way home from school, fighting police officers, fighting the fire department, just the entire mobilization of a white neighborhood. They were really at the forefront of one of the most violent civil rights confrontations in the country. And so by the 80s, a lot of the police abuse and a lot of the racial tensions in Chicago were about housing, and they were about segregation and about neighborhoods. Chicago is still one of the most segregated cities in the country, and these white neighborhoods were just defended with blood. Every time black families would start to move in, there would be these explosions of violence, and then very quickly all the white families would move out. And one thing that was just amazing was if you drive around Chicago now, every single house that Ronald lived in before he went to prison is gone. The Robert Taylor homes are gone. The houses he lived in on the South Side are gone. And the neighborhoods of Chicago that were once these bustling, white, ethnic, suburban enclaves are now totally disinvested from, totally abandoned, no jobs, no work, no one cares, no education. And now the city has bulldozed huge parts of the city. So to think about Ronald's story and his family's story in this larger Chicago history was just amazing. They were there time and again. And the police officers were from Bridgeport and from other white neighborhoods, and there was just a racial hatred about segregation that was um, really more violent than almost any other place in the country, including the South. I mean, Martin Luther King went to Chicago in 1965 and was hit in the head with a brick in a protest not far from where Ronald grew up, and he told police that he had never seen anything as violent in the South as he saw in Chicago that day.
Right. Earlier, I was talking to Ronald about, some of you might know Eddie Ellis. Yeah. Who he spent 25 years incarcerated in New York State. He had been unfortunately incarcerated for a crime he did not commit, and while he was there, he did a lot of work inside the prison, educating people who he was incarcerated with, and then once he got out, he hit the ground running in our communities, and still working on all the issues that he had been thinking about and acting on while he was incarcerated. So, Ronald, I know that your book is going to be perhaps very instrumental in helping a lot of people understand the issues that you were concerned about while you were there, and you did a lot of work inside the prison. What about now that you're out? Do you still see yourself working on addressing a lot of the issues around racism and incarceration?
I'm still involved with campaigning the death penalty. I'm still involved with exonerees, the Innocent Project. I'm still involved with Witness to Innocent. Yeah, my goal is, and I think our goal is, to bring awareness, because we know that racism is still alive and it's still well, and it's out there. No matter how much we try to cover it up or disguise it, the saying is, what your heart conceal, your mouth will reveal. So the truth is going to come out. No matter how it comes out, it's going to come out. So I still get phone calls every day from guys inside. I talk to them. I still give them legal work, or they have legal work for me to pass on to the next guy. So I'm pretty much still involved. I'd rather do stuff in the back of the scene than actually be trying to be a scene. But I think I'm working harder than I did when I was inside.
I think Eddie did the same thing. So, and he taught not only people in the community about how they could become involved in social change, but legislators and even the governor started to understand what he was talking about when he's talking about prison industrial complex and mass incarceration, and understanding all the things that were going on in the prison and outside. Ty, I'd like to ask you about Chicago, and we know that police abuse still exists, and it's everywhere. And in Albany, we deal with some of the same issues, Troy and Schenectady. What was different about Jon Burge, his tactics, and how the city either supported him or not?
Right. So, if we were in Chicago, everyone here would have been reading about this police commander named Jon Burge, and would have been hearing about him for the past 40 or 50 years or so. This is one of the most important scandals in American history, and the city of Chicago has been dealing with it or not dealing with it now for half a century. Jon Burge was a Vietnam War soldier who learned tactics of interrogation and torture in Vietnam, came back to Chicago, started patrolling the South Side, and tortured his first person in 1970 or 1971, so really 50 years ago. And then for more than a decade, he had this campaign of torture where they would frame innocent people, or if they had people who they thought actually had done the act, they would use torture to coerce them into convictions. In Ronald's case, they knew that Ronald was innocent of this crime. They had actually interviewed the people who almost certainly had committed the murders, but they dropped that lead to torture Ronald and get this conviction. So for almost 20 years they did this. Burge was fired from the Chicago police in the early 90s with full retirement benefits, and the city of Chicago has paid all of his legal fees, paid his pension, never brought charges against him. Burge eventually served a few years in federal prison, so the federal government did eventually convict him on a charge of perjury, never for torture, and he actually died a few months ago. But so the Burge scandal is one of the most important and persistent police scandals in the country. But the truth is that we read about police abuse all the time. I mean, in fact, we read about police abuse in Chicago all the time. It seems almost every month there's a new story, and these stories involve huge numbers of victims, hundreds of victims, thousands of victims. What really sets apart the Burge scandal is the activism of Ronald and the Death Row 10 and the people who organized the campaign to end the death penalty, because they've been working to bring justice to the victims and justice to Burge since the 1990s. So we have this huge extended history of activism. They succeeded in ending the death penalty in Illinois, one of the great legal victories of the last 50 years. And now the city of Chicago has passed a reparations law. The first reparations law in the country was passed by the city of Chicago in 2015. And among the provisions is the creation of a monument to torture victims, social services, health services, education services to victims, and also a ruling that the history of the Burge scandal has to be taught in Chicago public schools in perpetuity. So there's really nothing like that anywhere in the country, and it's actually become a model, and I'd love to hear if people are thinking about it here, but I know people are talking about it around the country, and part of what makes this decision a model that is inspiring people is because the restitution, the reparations goes beyond financial recompense for victims, but has these really important political and health and welfare elements to them. So it sort of represents a real new model. And people who have been activists around this case for 30 years and who have sort of seen the same 30 faces at every meeting year after year now go to a meeting and there's hundreds of teachers and thousands of students involved. And so there's a whole new generation of people who are learning about this and who will keep learning about it as long as we make sure that they keep teaching it. So it's a remarkable achievement. And it really does all come back to the Death Row 10, who got this all started from Death Row, which is one of the most amazing parts of this story.
That is really exciting. We're afraid to mention that word reparations. And so it's really nice to hear that Chicago has gone that far. You mentioned some of the things that have changed. Maybe I'll ask this question to both of you. What about policing today, outside of Chicago and around the nation? What do you see? What is different about what is happening now in terms of policing and the era of Jon Burge? Are we still in trouble here?
I think the difference is now that we have cell phones, and that's the difference right there. It's the cell phones with the cameras. They can turn their cameras off, but somebody got their cell phone still rolling. So that's about the only difference, really, is that just the cell phones. We have I guess we got policing the police when they pull up.
Yeah, well, I mean, in Chicago, they're still torturing people. I mean, there was a recent revelation that there's this black site, this secret precinct that is off all the maps, but which they're taking suspects to and torturing confessions out of. So they're still doing that, and they're still protecting one another. I mean, the sort of the so-called blue wall of protecting each other, which really never faltered for Burge. And the Chicago Police Association still defends Burge, and there are lots of people in Chicago who still think that Burge did the right thing. So, the only thing that's different is the level of militancy right now and activism and keeping pressure on police. I mean, I think the only thing that will keep change coming is just a constant vigilance about these issues. And I think that this move to bring the history of policing into the schools is really, really important. And when you hear police and school officials in Chicago talk about this, they always say something like, "This is history. We're not doing this now. This is what happened before, but we don't do this anymore." And in fact, the name Laquan McDonald, who was a young man who was murdered in Chicago, does not appear in the teaching materials that the school district created. But the minute these lessons begin in the classrooms, the students are always making those connections. And so they have not been able to keep out these contemporary things from the class. And so it is really bringing people together. And Ronald has gone and talked to the students, and many of the Burge survivors have been in classrooms telling their stories. And Ronald knows people in his family who are in those classes, and there's lots of people involved from all the generations.
But I noticed one of the things you were talking about in your book, and that's when you got out and were in the community, and you now find that police are still stopping you on the street, right? Yeah. That hasn't changed.
No, it hasn't. It's like whenever I go to Chicago, I have to get stopped at least like 3 or 4 times. It was like I said, like when I go to Chicago, it has to be like 3 or 4 times when they stop me. I remember one time my auntie asked me to go get a pizza, to pick this pizza up. Before I got from 110th to 103rd, I was stopped 3 times within that radius. And the first thing I do is I let my windows down, I turn my inside lights on, and I politely ask, "Officer, what are you stopping me for?" And the first thing they say is, "If it's not my seatbelt, which you can see through tint, it's a backlight is out on my car." And I have to reassure them, if any light comes off or that's broke on my car, it'll show up on my dashboard. I have to tell them that. So it was like one officer, he asked me, "Is this my car?" I told him, "Yeah." He like, "Can you prove it?" I tell him, "Yeah." So I hand him my license, proof of insurance and registration. Then he asked me, "Are you the same Ronald Kitchen used to stay on 66 in Artesian?" I tell him, "What do my ID say?" And we have to go through this tug of war. Because, yes, I'm the same Ronald Kitchen that got out, the same Ronald Kitchen that stayed on 66 in Artesian. Yes, I'm the same Ronald Kitchen, but I'm no longer here. It's been numerous of times I have to tell my cousins when they want to drive my car, it's hot. It's hot. I was telling Taz's mother and father how I got stopped when we was just out there in the book signing of Chicago in the summertime. Police pulled me over. Once again, I have tinted windows. And I asked them, and I let the windows down, "Why you pull me over?" And he said, "Man, your tint, not your seatbelt. I have tinted windows." So I'm like, okay, all right. So make a long story short, at the end of the conversation, he asked me, "How did I get this Mercedes-Benz?" I tell him, "Oh, y'all brought this for me."
Well, it certainly sounds like a lot of the same things happen all across the country and here locally. And there's some local issues that I really want to talk about and discuss here, but I want to make sure that the audience asks you any questions that they want to ask you about your experience and Ty, about your research, and then maybe we can come back and pick up on some of the things that you said about policing.
Great. I think we've been asked to have questioners use this microphone here to the side of the stage.
Oh, there it is. Okay.
Hi, I have two questions. One is, what was the role of the district attorney in the relationship with this Burge was his name? Because I know that the role of the DA, the state DA, is very powerful. Was there a relationship between the two of them? And the second question is, big question, what happened to the other 10 guys?
First question, the district attorney and Mayor Daley, when Mayor Daley was the district attorney, the attorney was his number one. The district attorney was his number one. So when Mayor Daley became the mayor of Chicago, he became the district attorney. So it's all about protecting each other. It's like Ty said, Burge was doing this stuff since 1969. He was Army, was that military police officer that was trained in torture tactics. So he took that same ideal and brought it to the city of Chicago. So he have always been protected by the district attorney, because in 1995 it was stated when this first came out with Jon Burge, and it was I can't remember the lady's name, but she was on TV. She said, well, we know that we had rogue cops, and she was assistant district attorney. She said, we know we have rogue cops, but what can we do? You could have did a lot, but you choose not to. So that's the role of how Chicago works. And if it wasn't for the Attorney General office that took over, that took the cases from them, a lot of guys wouldn't be out. And as far as what happened to the Death Row 10, the majority of the Death Row 10 guys has got out. If not got out, has passed away. There's still a couple of the original Death Row 10 guys are still locked up, like Stanley Howard, he's still in jail. Frank Bounce, he passed away. He's really about the only one, but everybody else has got Aaron Patterson, Madison Hobley, myself, has got out. But we talking about, like I said, in the original thing, the Death Row 10 was just like a stamp. It was like a what you want to call a title or something like that. Something that was catchy. But we still talking about probably 100 or better guys that's still incarcerated under Jon Burge that has not been touched and they don't even want to talk about.
Yeah, right. So there's definitely still Burge victims inside, and there's never been a clemency or a general release of Burge victims like there actually have been for a couple other Chicago police scandals. But I just want to say something about the way you were talking about the Death Row 10, because I want to thinking about something we thought a lot about with this book, which is narratives and telling stories. And you talked about how you wanted to put kind of a face to the name, and that was the idea. You told me that when you began this work against the death penalty and against the police of Chicago, the death penalty was hugely popular in Illinois. The city of Chicago had enormous prestige. I mean, your jury in your case wouldn't look you in the eyes, believed their story, implicitly, even though they didn't have a shred of evidence to corroborate the confession. And you said that you knew that to make a difference, it would take really a revolution in the way people's consciousness worked. And you guys and people on the outside built these stories around you and around your lives and your families. And it was this storytelling that really did work this amazing revolution in people's consciousness. And eventually, Jesse Jackson and others did get on board. You know, when the momentum started building, people then wanted to get a piece of the story. And that's when the TV's shows came into prisons and started interviewing people. Right. And you really made it a major cause. And you sort of built that up through storytelling, which is something we kind of think about in the book.
So this is for Ronald. Does it follow, given your experiences today and then, that we should end policing as we know it, and that we should abolish prisons?
No, I don't think we could abolish prisons because some people belongs in prisons. I'm not saying that everybody's in prison they're innocent, but I'm quite sure you have a lot of people that's innocent in prison. I'm not saying all cops are bad. We know they're not. But prisons are there for a reason. Prisons are there to house those who have done a crime, not the innocent. And that's where they're getting it confused at. They're putting innocent people in prison, and the people that have done that crime is still walking free to do some more crimes. So we're not trying to confuse the issues or the situation. The situation is, I'm not saying that, hey, we should destroy all prisons and knock down all prisons. No, I'm not saying that because we know we need prisons. I'm not saying that we have to stop to oversee the police officers. No, we only need to oversee the police officers that we know where they are committing more crimes than the criminals themselves, who they calling the criminals. I'm up here saying that innocent people, women or men, shouldn't end up on death row. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that it's not going to happen because it has happened. Now, my thing is, I was an innocent man in my 20s. Now, if I do something, I deserve to get punished for that. I believed in that. My mama taught me that if you do something, you get your butt whooped. So if I'm out there doing something crazy, I need to go to jail. If it says to go to jail, send me to jail for something that I've done. Don't give me a case and then knowing that I'm an innocent and then fought to kill me behind that. Where's the law in that? That's what we're talking about. Where's the law in that? So, yeah, we have to still police the police. Because if we don't, we're going to see a lot of more Jon Burges going to fall from out of a tree. We're going to see a lot of more innocent people come walking out the penitentiary. It's like every time you turn to Channel 5 in Chicago, 3 or 4 people are walking out innocent. That's the whole reason why we need to police and watch. Only way we can do that, we have to bring awareness and we have to believe in what we're fighting for.
I believe, well, I won't disagree with you on that. I'm an abolitionist. And as Michelle Alexander says, we certainly should end prison as we know them. That putting people in prison does not necessarily protect me or anyone else. It destroys. Prisons are toxic institutions, and they always harm. So we have to find ways of dealing with criminal behavior that doesn't destroy people, and I think prisons do. So I would disagree. I know that you have a particular interest because you were innocent and you were incarcerated, and I understand that. But prison didn't fall from the heavens. We created them. And also prisons disproportionately are used to control people of color. And so they're the ones the prisons are made for. And I think when I mentioned Eddie Ellis earlier, Eddie showed that very clearly because he did research and he taught us to look at how prisons are being used and the impact that they have on our communities. So I think that was a very valuable thing for him to teach us, because he looked at who was incarcerated. And mass incarceration is not about crime at all. It's about control. And so I think, many of us would say that we need to understand that, and we need to find other ways of dealing with criminal behavior and criminalizing people. A lot of times we criminalize people who aren't necessarily involved in any criminal activity, but we find ways of criminalizing them through our laws and other behaviors, and especially policing. So we would argue that we don't need prisons in order to deal with the problem of crime and public safety, because they don't promote public safety. That's my opinion.
Okay. I mean, we have a right to disagree.
Oh, yeah.
But I was on death row,
Yes.
and I have heard serial killers talk and brag about their victims. So what are we supposed to do with them? I have heard rapists on the galleries bragging about how they raped a child, raped a woman, killed somebody. What are we supposed to do with them? I'm not here to justify. I'm not here to claim. But I was in the pit of hell around these guys, heard them, the sick conversations. I don't believe in the death penalty, but what is left, I don't believe in the death penalty. But if we take prisoners away and they still walk in the street, then what we have? We have the Wild Wild West again. Everybody holding court, court in the street, come knocking on the door and just take me for anybody. So we need law and order. We need that. We need a system that promotes law and order. Because if not, those who do crime, what are we to do with them? Some people you can't help. Let's just be truthful about that. When a serial killer go out there and kill his first victim, he don't stop. He continues to do it. So I don't care how much psychiatry work or how many couches he sit on, how much pills he get on. If you let him out, he gonna do this. He gonna do it again. So like I said, we are here to agree to disagree, but I believe some things are meant to be, because I was there, and I'm not gonna never say, hey, because I was there and we don't need police and we don't need prisons. I'm not gonna ever say that. I was there. I heard it all. Every sick conversation, I heard it all. So this is one of these moments that I get touchy, and I try to stay away from it. I try to pull myself back into reality. I know where I'm at, because if me and her would be cussing right now we've been really going into it, but I'm not even gonna touch that. But that's just one of those moments I have, and I have to pull myself back. So let me pull myself back.
Okay. I don't blame you. It's true. You've experienced something that many of us will probably never understand, what you've seen and what you've experienced, and I understand that as well. But you use one word, sick. And so when somebody's sick, I think you need to find ways to treat them. But let somebody else get involved in this conversation.
I appreciate this conversation, and I just want to say before I ask my question that I'm really sorry that you had to be in that pit, that you were placed in that pit by a racist, white supremacist society that didn't see your humanity, that subjected you to that brutality, that you had to witness that. for years and all the trauma that that must be. And I totally hear why you might feel like cursing right now and like why this is a difficult conversation. I just want to honor you for showing up for this community.
Thank you.
So thank you. I had two, my grandfather and my uncle both served hard time in prison years and years ago. They actually had committed crimes. They didn't warrant the kind of sentencing that my uncle got, but so be it. He survived. He got out after many years because my family advocated to keep him safe and all this, but he was old by the time they let him out. This issue is very near and dear to me. I also work for a coalition against sexual assault. So when you talk about serial rapists and serial killers and people who assault children, I feel you. I feel how that's a quandary we have in the social justice movement, this wedge between how to keep families safe and how to also not brutalize human beings for doing the wrong things and making bad decisions or being sick, as Alice pointed out. Like sometimes people are put in prison when they really need treatment, right? They need mental health services and they need supports. But that's not my question. My question had to do more with, by going after innocent people like this police leader did for 30 years or 50 years, he brutalized innocent people and whoever he wanted to, right, based on racism, I'm thinking mostly. He ignored the actual people who were committing the crimes. In your case, it sounds like he knew who did the crime, and he didn't look at that evidence. He didn't heed that, right? He didn't prosecute that person or go after that person. Instead, he went after you. How is that serving our so-called criminal justice? How is that serving the cause of ending criminality, right? When we're going after people, like if I'm trying to think of how to get white people on board to recognize that the way the system's operating isn't stopping crime at all. It's about what Ty said, it's about controlling people, right? And you all are saying this, it's about controlling people. So if we're really about stopping crime, then why aren't we really doing thorough investigations, right? It's the same issue with sexual violence. They don't look at how somebody who's been, doing harm to women, they should really check out that person. A lot of times they've done many other things, but they never investigate those other things to see this pattern of power and control that they tend to have. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about how. Well, I know in Europe and other countries, they're doing different prison systems. And I'm wondering how, if in your law classes that you had inside, if you studied some of those other alternative, other kinds of systems, probably mostly looking at how to get yourselves out, I imagine, more than like what kind of prisons, or maybe you could answer this, Alice. I just would really like to know, like if this movement is trying to propose different types of systems to protect the public, and that also deal with the investigation piece so that the people who did harm are actually held accountable rather than going after people like you.
Long question.
I tell people about me being innocent that was on death row, that I think somewhat gave me didn't give me the right to try to judge a person as far as of what they've been charged with. First of all, I wasn't there, so once me as an innocent man was placed in a place where the guilty should be, mess your thought process up of who you think is guilty or who you think is innocent. Because you're saying to yourself now, hold up, I'm an innocent man here, so how can I tell if he's innocent or guilty? And the only reason why, I say this, and then I go back to what she was saying. Like, it's a difference when I hear the guilty to brag about it. It's a big difference when I hear them over the gallery discussing what they have done It's a big difference to a person that's sitting back and just going off his case. Now, if you sit up there and tell me you've done this, hey, there's no question of me judging, of trying to figure you out. But sitting back, like in this room right here, somebody could do a crime. I'm not going to sit back and say, well, I think he's innocent or she's guilty. It done took that away from me because I am too afraid that I might pick the wrong person for a crime that he didn't do. So that done took my ability away from me to try to judge that. If it's not hard proof, I need hard proof. If it's not that, I cannot judge, and I would not judge.
If I can just add on to that, I mean, one of the things that we learned when we were having these conversations and doing research is that sort of mutual suspicion really is part of the Burge system. I mean, Burge and, the Burge scandal was not a few police detectives, but a massive collaboration of dozens or hundreds of people, from the medics who did Ronald's intake when he went into jail, but then refused to testify on his behalf, or the assistant district attorney who took the confession even though it was clearly coerced. But it took the people inside many years to actually get to the point of trusting one another and talking about the cases. They had been told, you don't talk about your case inside. You never know who will be sort of giving information to the authorities. And so there was this mutual distrust that it was part of the system that was one of the things that the Burge detectives really counted on to allow the conspiracy to go as long as it did. I mean, it was several years before you started to have these conversations and start to hear the name Burge and the other detectives. And it turned out that it was, in almost all of their cases, it was the same handful of detectives involved in the investigation.
Also, in regards to your question,
Mike.
I'm used to just talking, but there are a number of communities that are experimenting and implementing diversion programs so that people who would otherwise be arrested can now be given treatment and services that assist them in becoming productive members of our society. So there's a whole bunch of things that we could do in terms of diversion. Right now, we're only diverting people with low-level offenses, but I see down the road that we should be doing it already, is diverting people with felonies and even violent felons. If we're ever going to deal with the problem of mass incarceration, you're going to have to do that, because otherwise it won't happen. Okay, so I think that is one of the things that we certainly could be doing. The other thing, when we talk about who's innocent and who's guilty, we get into that discussion. Some of you remember Angela Davis, right? She always pointed this out. She says that she estimated probably 98% of us have committed a crime for which we could have been incarcerated. So there's not a whole lot of difference between the people who are locked up and the people who are out here. And we also use this to deny people rights that would help them become involved members in our community. For instance, the issue of universal suffrage is one. We don't allow people who are incarcerated to vote because for some reason they're not worthy. We don't serve people in our community, a lot of people in our community, because they are determined not to be worthy. So we get into to all of that when we're really dealing with selecting certain people for incarceration and not others. There's some other people. Sorry. Yes.
Mr. Kitchen, I'm hoping you could talk a little bit about how you met Mr. Jones and why you decided to work with him, of all people, and what the process was like, and Mr. Jones, too, from you, what it was like. Thanks.
I met Ty through my surrogate family. They adopted me, which is my lawyer. She was my criminal lawyer. She was a second-year law student. I was with her from her being a law student till she became an attorney and assistant professor at Northwestern. So she introduced me to her husband's family, her brother-in-law, mother-in-law, everybody. So, and Dan is my financial advisor. So when the book came about, he told me he knew somebody who was Ty Jones, and he was gonna let me talk to him, and his wife, Logan. So I think the first time we met, you came to my house, right? Yeah. So, and we sat down for 4 or 5 hours, and we talked. We went out to dinner, and it was the right spirit. It was the right spirit with us. And we took off from there. About what, 5 years ago?
Yeah, that was 5 years ago. I now have a 4-year-old son who was not even around, and
Right.
your daughter was, I think, 2 or so.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was a long time coming, and we just had we talked for 5 years and wrote down these stories, and Logan, who's a historian who works on the history of prisons in the U.S., did a lot of research about the criminal justice system, and it worked like a charm. What can I say?
One of the things in your book you talked about was destroying the journal that you had kept for I don't know how long. Do you think about that again?
I do.
You do. I know. When I read the book, I said, "Oh my God, he tore up his journal." But I understand why you did.
I had, I started putting that together when I was sentenced to death. So when I got to death row, and it was November the 6th of 90, when I got shipped to death row. And the reason why, like I say, the reason why I started the journal was when they took me to Pontiac and they opened up the gates, it was the wintertime. And they had this white guy named Chuck Salaji was outside. And when he was outside, it was freezing. He was out there in a pair of socks and a pair of drawers playing basketball. And they told me, this is where you're going. You're going where he's at. So when you see this kind of craziness, so you want to go write it down because you don't want to forget this. This is the moment. This is a whole new chapter of your life. This is where you might end up dying at. So I started writing down all this little funny little things that I see. I hear people talking about. It's like I was talking about the guys who I heard saying the stuff over the gallery. I used to write all that down. So in 2005, I was in Menard. And it was 2003. I was in Menard. And I was talking to Caroline on the phone. And I hate lawyers lawyers got this thing that said, the whole thing is, we're going to start this, we're about to. And I hate that. And I used to always ask them, so when are we going to put the post-conviction petition out? We're about to start investigating. I'm like, I thought we did this. So now I keep hearing hearing all this about to, we're going to start this. It like killed my spirit. So I was talking to my cellie, and he was asking me what was I doing. At first, I was just sitting in the middle of the floor. So I got my little box out, and it was like 1,800 pages. I done just saved front and back. So I sat there, I tore up the first one, and it felt so good, but at the same time, it hurted, but because I didn't see an ending coming to this. So there was no need for me to save this because it was going to never be an ending. And before I knew it, I done flushed the whole 1,800 pages down the toilet.
That was hard for me to read,
Yeah.
but I
I
understand.
wish I would have kept every page down
Yeah,
there.
I wish you would. Do you have a question?
Yeah. Thank you.
I may have missed something, but when did you get out and how did it happen? And what has it been like coming back into society such as it is?
I got out July 9th of 2009. It was funny. I used to work in the kitchen. So they came and told me they had a legal phone call, which was on a Thursday. So let me see, Friday. So it's like the fourth or something like that. And they said you got a legal phone call. So I'm like, okay. So they come and get me. I called Tom. Tom was my lawyer, Tom Garrity. He like, Ronald, I got some good news, but I can't tell you. No, that was Caroline. He say, it's some really good news, but I can't tell you. So this is at 5 o'clock in the evening. I'm like, so Tom, so why did you have them come and get me out my cell to tell me you got some good news that you can't tell me? This is a really waste of a phone call. And I told him, listen, I'm going to talk to you later. He's like, no, but they might come and get you tomorrow. I'm like, okay, but you can't tell me why. He's like, I can't tell you. So I hung the phone up. So I'm going back to my cell. I'm cussing the guard mad because he had to bring me over there. I'm cussing because this phone call I just received was the most stupidest phone call you can ever tell somebody. But in my spirit, I felt that I was going home. So when I went to work that night, I told my supervisor, I'm going home tomorrow. So listen, I don't need this job no more. So they came and got me in the morning. And so they came and got us. They shipped us to Stateville. So Caroline, who I told you, who was my surrogate sister, she's my sister from another mother. That's what I call her. So she came and got me. She called me out, and she said, Ronald, I got some good news, and I got some bad news for you. Now, this was on a Sunday. So this was on the 9th. This was on a Sunday. I said, man, tell me the bad news. She said, Michael Jackson is dead. I tell her, man, this has been on the news for about a week or two now, you know? What's the good news? She said, you're going home tomorrow. I haven't cried in like 19 years. I'm sitting there crying. I'm like, you better not be lying to me. Come on now. She said, you're going home tomorrow. So when they came and got us, when I went back to my cell, I cried myself to sleep. When they came to my cell, my feet were still on the wall. I had my butt hanging off the bunk and my back on it. But that's how I fell asleep, still crying. So when they came and got us, my lawyer, Tom again, he come back there, he tell me, he said, this is going to be a tricky situation. Because we have this judge named Judge Stacks. He's a real state's attorney judge. He have never gave anybody anything if they wasn't with the state. So we have to trick him. And he said that the AG is on board with it, which is the Attorney General's office. So they got him in front of the judge, And when you see this little white man on this stand, and he got this robe on, he got this real narrow face, and he got this pointed nose. He like no nonsense, but he has been what we call an asshole since he took the case from Stuart Palmer. So they tell him, we think that Ronald Kitchen and Marvin Reeves deserve a new trial. This is what the AG said. So we need you, Your Honor, to grant the new trial and send the case back to the chief judge so the chief judge can oversee the case. And the man put his glasses down, he looked up, so Tom whispered in my ear, he's like, this shit ain't gonna work. You know, it's just not gonna work. So my heart beating fast, and the AG looking at Tom, and Caroline looking, and everybody trying to figure out what was happening. So he finally said, okay, granted, he knocked it down to the chief judge. Took it back downstairs to Judge Beadle, who was the chief judge. So when we got down there, went in front of the chief judge, and then he asked who was all there for me, so all the lawyers stood up for me. He asked who was there for Marvin, his lawyer stood up. And really, basically, Tom, Caroline, whoever was with me, they hadn't anything to say. The AG got up there and said what they said. They tell me, Your Honor, we think that Ronald Kitchen deserved a new trial. As a matter of fact, he deserved to be, all charges to be dropped against him and Marvin Reeves, and a certificate of innocence. And the judge granted it. So on January the 9th of 2009, I walked out of Cook County Jail free. That's how I was.
You really have to read the book, because that's the part that made me cry while I'm reading this book. So you've done a great job, recounting it here. But there's something about when I was reading the book, it brings tears to you. So, yes.
Well, thanks for writing this book and getting the story out, and Ty helping with the wizardry of getting it into the curriculum of the Chicago schools. Let's hope it gets to the law schools and the law enforcement training centers. But the one question I have, and it bothered me in here, the Burge and his criminal gang, they went to their death and they're going to their reward without, any sense of wrongdoing or any sign of it, right? They just stood tough. The blue wall that stood around them at the time stood around them. But really, after all this other stuff happened, the Attorney General comes around, the Chief Judge comes around, people are gathering, your story is incredibly moving. Did anybody from that era who was sitting in a police car or in the district attorney's office or in the city when they were, going to fight your civil case afterwards, has anybody come forward and said, man, we're sorry, we were wrong? Or did they just keep that blue wall up even to this day from the people who were involved at the time of your, before you went to prison?
No. But the mayor of Chicago, Mayor Ramley? Yeah. He was the only one actually gave an official apology on national TV, but he wasn't in office when none of this went down. So someone did, but a person that had nothing to do with anything.
And just thinking about how rare it is for someone to change their opinion like that, the way you're describing. There is a character in this story, which is the governor of Illinois, Governor Ryan, who was a Republican governor who was elected as a death penalty advocate, who actually changed his stance after kind of seeing the evidence that these people had been convicted on. And thanks to Ronald and the Death Row 10 and a lot of activists, he had this amazing conversion, a once-in-a-lifetime conversion for a politician. And where is he now?
In prison.
Now he's in prison. No, he's free now. That's right. But he then, his career was then destroyed, and he.
But that was one of your heroes. You mentioned him as one. as a hero.
Listen, if I love Governor Ryan because he went against the grain in Chicago. He put a moratorium on the death penalty. Then on top of that, he cleared death row of all 200-some people and gave us all natural lives. So he went totally against the death penalty. See, the death penalty wasn't abolished. It was still going on, but he just cleared it. And for that act, they went out to him and gave him 6 years for corruption. So kudos to Governor Ryan.
Right. You never got to meet him, right?
I mean, I'm going to go find him one day.
Yes.
Hello, Mr. Kitchen, and I just want to say thank you so much for taking time out your busy schedule to visit the Capital District. Hello, Dr. Green. If you don't remember Dr. Green, years ago, you were the one who sparked my interest in making a difference. I came to your office, I shared my story, and you led me to a group. So let me share my story with you briefly, and hopefully we can bring this conversation full circle. In 2005, I was the owner of H. Bosch Moving and Storage. I had 3 trucks, 12 workers, and was making $500,000 a year. April of that year, I was arrested. My house caught fire. I was arrested, charged with 3 felony counts, facing 35 years in prison. 2 years later, after spending upwards of $200,000 in cash of my own money, I was acquitted. Now, let me say this. I don't think, just like you, Mr. Kitchen, all prosecutors are bad. I don't think all police are bad. I even have faith in our criminal justice system. But I'm speaking of the bad prosecutors, the bad system, all right, the bad police. So after I was acquitted, I said to myself, I didn't want to give up. I didn't lay down. I stood up. I wanted to fight. I visited Dr. Green's office. I don't even know if you remember that. You led me to a group that it was called It Could Happen to You. So for the past 7 years, I advocated, I fought, I lobbied. 2018, June of 2018, this year, New York State became the first state in the union, I don't know if a lot of you realize or notice, that passed a law on the bill is the Commission of Prosecutorial Commission, or Prosecutorial Conduct. We're the first in the state where now we hold prosecutors accountable. New York State paved the way. We're the first state in the union to pass a bill. I had a little something to do with that. The day the bill was passed, I was acknowledged by the New York State Assembly for my advocacy work, and they also spoke on my case. So I say to you, I applaud you. I applaud your work. I also say it's rather, I don't know, it's odd that most of you people in here don't even know I exist. And I had so much to do with a bill that's going to affect and change and protect your children going up. Because now prosecutors can't just throw anything up against the wall and make it stick. You have rights. There's a law. See, when I was in the system, I didn't have rights. Now, I can't compare to your story, nor do I try. Wrongful conviction, death row. But what we both went through, sir, is the criminal justice system. Am I right or wrong? And it changed the trajectory of our lives forever. So that's why I decided to fight. So this bill now gives us all a sense of protection, because prosecutors are the only profession in the world up until June of this year had no legislation, had no regulation. They could just do anything they want, ruin your life, which they did to me, and say, oh, well, see you next time. Now they have to pause. They have to think about it. So in addition to that, sir, I now take this fight to the other states in the union. I want to speak. I want to advocate, and I would ask you to come on board with what we do. I do a lot of work with Jeff Desicovich. I'm sure you heard of him. He was wrongfully convicted, served 16 years, came out, sued them for $42 million. Now he's in third-year Pace Law School. Zelman Days, he did 16 years. He's right in Philadelphia where you are now. All 3 of us was acknowledged that day by the New York State Assembly for our work. Now, me, I was acquitted. But what bothered me so bad is they had so many programs for people who have been exonerated and wrongfully convicted. I was out on an island all by myself. There were no programs. People just said to me, oh, you should be lucky you didn't go to jail. But it still changed the trajectory of my life, my business, my family, my standing in the community. So I decided to fight. I decided to stand up, and I continue to do that. And like I said, most of you don't even know I exist. Am I right or wrong? And I had so much to do with a bill that's going to change each and every one of your lives. But that's my mission. And I know the more I speak, the more you will know about it, and the more you will hear about it. So I ask you, sir, what do you feel about the bill was passed? And don't you feel it's a need for the other states to pass it? Thank you.
Without a doubt, it's a great bill. And every state should have that same bill. Everybody should be held accountable for their actions.
Absolutely.
Period. Without a doubt.
Thank you.
Is there a website?
Hello?
Yeah, I'm just wondering how we can find out more about it.
The bill?
Well,
Oh, me? My website is right here, WOOC 105.3 FM, Troy, New York. Because let me say this, all right, let me end by saying this, all right? WOOC gave me a voice. My foundation, Made to Believe LLC Network, gave me a platform, and I am forever grateful to this station, all right? They gave me an opportunity to make a difference by being a difference. That man right back there, he won't take any credit. Stand up, Steve. Stand up. He came to me last year and he says, I need you. Are you still interested? December will be 62 shows I've done making a difference in people's lives. Thank you.
Good work, bro. Good work.
Okay, we're going to have to end this, but I think what you've just said is so important because some of the major changes that have taken place in criminal justice have been because people who were directly impacted have worked to make those changes. So you join with this gentleman and people like Eddie Ellis because they have given us so much. So I want to thank you again, even though we disagree on something. I have a great deal of respect for what you did and what you went through, and I'm so glad that you're here instead of still inside.
Thank you.
We have some books here that Ronald will be and Ty will be happy to sign, and I really encourage you to read the book because it's fantastic. Thank you. Excuse me? I did, but they told me I have no time.
Then I'll just say quickly that among several issues of police violence in the Capital District, here in Troy, we are fighting for justice for somebody named Damique McDonald, who was shot by the police and fortunately survived. We have a table in the back with brochures and buttons. There are a number of other cases in the Capital District. We're coordinating. We have a lot of demands to try to make. We're inspired by stories like Ronald Kitchen's story. We really believe that we can now have more of a voice than we've had in the past. And we're trying to make major changes here in the Capital District. So check out our table. Thanks.
Right. And one last word. I would encourage anybody who's interested. We don't have enough time to talk about it, but the Elazar Williams case where the young man was shot by a police officer who remains actually paralyzed from the chest down, and the police department has given two conflicting accounts of how that happened, and the prosecutor in Albany, Soares, is not listening to us when we say that there needs to be a special prosecutor. So if anybody's interested in that case, I'd be happy to talk about it later. but we need your support in terms of keeping pressure on the prosecutor in this particular case. So thank you for bringing that up. Appreciate it. Okay.